The televised courtroom had rarely, if ever, experienced such raw and unapologetic arrogance. Karen Mitchell, the HOA president of Willowbrook Estates, stood before America's most intimidating TV judge with a level of smug assurance that only someone with years of unchecked control over others could possess. Her perfectly groomed finger rose and pointed straight toward Judge Judy Sheindlin as the sentence that would ultimately ruin her life escaped her lips. "You're being ridiculous, Judge. It's obvious you don't understand HOA law." The silence that followed was suffocating. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed sharply into a piercing glare, the kind that had made seasoned lawyers falter under pressure on national television. But what came next would stun everyone present and transform Karen Mitchell from a neighborhood dictator into one of the most despised figures in the country. Karen had entered that courtroom convinced of her invincibility. For 8 years, she had ruled her suburban domain with an iron grip, using HOA regulations as weapons against anyone who dared oppose her. She had broken marriages, drained families financially, and forced good people to abandon their homes using nothing more than violation notices and mounting legal expenses. Today, she believed, would be no different. Another effortless win. Another opportunity to embarrass a homeowner who had dared to plant flowers without her approval. What she didn't realize was that Judge Judy had spent the previous night combing through police records, legal documents, and criminal background files. She had no clue that the woman she had just insulted knew secrets about her past. Secrets powerful enough to land her behind bars. Across the courtroom, Maria Rodriguez sat nervously in the plaintiff's chair, clutching a thick folder filled with HOA harassment letters. Documents that had turned her dream home into a living nightmare. For 2 years, Karen had relentlessly targeted Maria's family with increasingly absurd violations. Grass measured half an inch too long. Christmas decorations left up a single day past the deadline. Children's chalk drawings on their own driveway. The total cost, $15,000 in fines and legal fees, had nearly destroyed the Rodriguez family financially. But Maria had finally gathered the courage to fight back. What she didn't know was that she was about to witness one of the most brutal courtroom takedowns ever seen on television. Judge Judy leaned back slightly in her chair, a faint smile forming at the edge of her lips. After 35 years in the legal system, she had developed an almost uncanny ability to identify liars, manipulators, and dangerous personalities within seconds. Karen Mitchell had triggered every warning signal the moment she entered the room. Her entitled posture, her dismissive tone toward the plaintiff, and the casual cruelty in her voice while describing the violations. It all pointed towards someone with a far darker history than simply leading a suburban HOA. And Judge Judy's investigation had confirmed her worst suspicions. Before we continue into this dramatic unraveling of one of America's most hated Karens, make sure to hit that like button if you're ready to watch Judge Judy completely dismantle an entitled HOA leader who believed she was above the law. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss these intense courtroom moments that reveal what happens when bullies cross the wrong judge. Trust me, what Judge Judy is about to reveal regarding Karen's criminal past will leave you completely shocked. The atmosphere inside the courtroom was charged with tension. The audience, mostly longtime viewers, could sense immediately that something about this case was different. Karen's opening statement had been filled with entitlement and superiority, labeling Maria Rodriguez as someone who doesn't respect property values and claiming that her actions were destroying the beauty of their community. She even rolled her eyes as Maria emotionally described sleepless nights and her children asking why a mean lady kept sending frightening letters. The audience's murmurs of disapproval only fueled Karen further, reinforcing her belief that she was surrounded by overly sensitive people who couldn't handle real authority. Judge Judy, however, listened quietly, almost like a predator waiting for the exact right moment to strike. She began asking simple, seemingly harmless questions about Karen's background, her qualifications, and her understanding of property law. Karen answered confidently, almost arrogantly, clearly believing she was educating what she considered an uninformed television judge about the realities of running a high-end neighborhood. But when Judge Judy questioned the excessive fines, Karen made the biggest mistake of her life. "Judge, with all due respect, you're being stupid. These people need to learn consequences. Maybe if you actually understood HOA law instead of just being a TV judge, you'd realize I'm protecting property values and community standards." The words had barely left her mouth before the energy in the room shifted completely. What Karen didn't realize was that Judge Judy had served as a family court judge in New York for 25 years before her television career, handling thousands of cases involving disputes, fraud, and criminal conduct. What Karen didn't realize was that Judge Judy's research team had uncovered a troubling behavioral pattern that went far beyond strict HOA enforcement, and most importantly, what Karen didn't realize was that insulting Judge Judy had just triggered one of the most devastating revelations in courtroom television history, one that would expose her not just as a controlling HOA president, but something far more dangerous. The tension inside the courtroom had grown so intense, it felt almost suffocating. Karen Mitchell sat in the defendant's chair with the posture of someone who had never truly been held accountable for her actions. Her expensive designer handbag rested tightly in her grip, almost like a protective shield against the rising hostility around her. She remained completely unaware that she was sitting on a ticking time bomb, that Judge Judy was moments away from detonating. Behind her outward confidence, small cracks had already begun to form. Judge Judy's questions were becoming sharper, more direct, and increasingly uncomfortable. Yet Karen's arrogance was so deeply rooted that she failed to recognize the danger unfolding right in front of her. This case, at its core, was supposed to be simple: a dispute over unauthorized landscaping. Maria Rodriguez had planted a small flower garden in her front yard without submitting the proper HOA paperwork, a minor violation that usually resulted in nothing more than a warning or perhaps a small fine. But Karen had turned it into something far more sinister. What should have been a routine notice escalated into a 2-year campaign of relentless harassment that crossed every boundary of reason and legality. The flower garden became Karen's justification to scrutinize every inch of the Rodriguez property. She began issuing violations for the smallest, most insignificant details, things that other homeowners routinely ignored without consequence. A single dandelion in the lawn suddenly became a $500 fine. Children drawing with chalk on their own driveway was labeled destruction of community property. Even a garden hose left coiled instead of neatly stored was cited as improper equipment handling. But this case was never really about flowers or HOA rules. It was about control, absolute unchecked control, and what happens when someone with a troubling past is given even a small amount of authority over others. Karen had weaponized the HOA system against the Rodriguez family for one simple reason: Maria had dared to question her authority. During a board meeting, Maria had asked why violation notices seemed to target certain families while others were ignored. That single question had sealed her fate. From that moment on, Karen made it her mission to destroy the Rodriguez family, dedicating 2 full years to proving that challenging her power came with devastating consequences. For Maria and her family, the stakes couldn't have been higher. They had invested their life savings into their dream home in Willowbrook Estates, believing they were entering a safe and welcoming community. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a nightmare. They became prisoners in their own home, afraid to let their children play outside, afraid to decorate for holidays, even afraid to park their car in a way that might trigger another violation notice. The legal costs alone had drained their finances and nearly torn their marriage apart. Maria's husband had repeatedly suggested selling the house and leaving, but Maria refused. She was determined not to let Karen force yet another family out of their home. What made this situation even more explosive was something Karen had absolutely no knowledge of: Judge Judy's preparation. While Karen had expected a routine television appearance where she could confidently portray herself as a responsible community leader, Judge Judy had been conducting a level of investigation that rivaled professional law enforcement agencies. Her team had contacted former neighbors, reviewed extensive court records, and spoken with previous HOA board members who had mysteriously stepped down after working alongside Karen. What they uncovered painted a deeply disturbing picture. This wasn't just a case of someone enforcing rules too strictly. This was a pattern, one that suggested long-term abuse of authority, manipulation, and behavior that edged dangerously into criminal territory. The audience could feel it building. Regular viewers of Judge Judy recognized the signs instantly. The way she leaned back slightly when she was preparing to dismantle someone's case. The subtle smile that appeared when she knew she had undeniable evidence. But this felt different, more intense, more personal, more devastating than the usual disputes involving unpaid rent or minor scams. The woman sitting in that defendant's chair had no idea that she was about to become one of the most hated individuals in America. She had no idea that millions of viewers would soon be watching her downfall, sharing clips of her humiliation across every social media platform imaginable to fully grasp the magnitude of what was about to unfold. It's important to understand who these individuals truly were and what had led them to this explosive confrontation. Karen Mitchell, now 52 years old, had spent nearly 2 decades mastering the art of controlling others through small but powerful authority. Growing up in a middle-class family in suburban Ohio, she had always displayed controlling tendencies even as a child. She was known for reporting classmates and demanding authority figures intervene. Her first real taste of influence came after marrying Robert Mitchell, a successful insurance executive. His financial stability allowed Karen to leave her job as a bank teller and dedicate herself fully to what she described as community involvement, though most people recognized it as intrusive and controlling behavior. When the Mitchell family moved into Willowbrook Estates 8 years ago, Karen immediately set her sights on joining the HOA board. She campaigned on maintaining property values and upholding community standards, messages that initially seemed reasonable. However, her interpretation of those standards quickly became extreme. She began measuring grass height with rulers and conducting unannounced inspections of residents' trash bins. Within just 6 months of her becoming HOA president, 3 board members resigned. Unable to tolerate her increasingly authoritarian leadership style, Karen transformed ordinary meetings into something resembling courtroom proceedings, where she acted as judge, jury, and executioner for anyone who violated her version of the rules. What made Karen especially dangerous was her complete absence of empathy, combined with an obsessive attention to detail. She kept detailed records on every resident, their schedules, their visitors, even their daily habits. She specifically targeted vulnerable families, those struggling financially, the elderly, or individuals too intimidated to fight back. Her husband, Robert, initially supported her involvement, but as complaints and legal threats increased, he distanced himself, focusing entirely on his work and leaving Karen unchecked in her behavior. Maria Rodriguez, on the other hand, represented everything Karen disliked about the changing neighborhood. A hardworking nurse, Maria had sacrificed endlessly, working double shifts to afford the down payment on her dream home. Her family brought warmth, joy, and life into their part of the neighborhood. Children laughing, weekend gatherings, and a genuine sense of community. To Karen, however, this represented a threat to her rigid control. When Maria questioned her authority, she unknowingly became the perfect target. Someone Karen could use to demonstrate her power. What began as a simple warning about a flower garden quickly escalated. Maria attempted to cooperate and find a middle ground, but Karen interpreted any form of negotiation as defiance. The violations multiplied rapidly, each one carefully crafted to maximize financial damage while remaining technically within HOA rules. Maria's husband, Carlos, A construction worker who respected rules and order urged her to comply just to end the conflict. But Maria had seen what happened to families who gave in, how Karen continued to exploit them even after compliance. She refused to let her children grow up believing that bullies always win. Meanwhile, Judge Judy Sheindlin, at 78 years old, had built a reputation for her almost supernatural ability to detect deception and manipulation. Before becoming a television icon, she had spent 25 years as a family court judge in New York, handling over 20,000 cases involving every kind of human conflict imaginable. She had encountered abusers, scammers, irresponsible parents, and habitual liars. Yet something about Karen Mitchell stood out even among the worst she had seen. During their brief pre-show interaction, Karen had displayed a mix of charm and cruelty that immediately raised red flags. What truly set this case apart, however, was the depth of investigation conducted by Judge Judy's team. They uncovered a consistent pattern of behavior, one that suggested this was far more than an HOA dispute. The criminal background check revealed information that transformed this case into something far darker. Judge Judy had learned to trust her instincts over decades of experience, and every instinct was telling her that Karen Mitchell was not just a difficult personality, but someone whose actions may have crossed into serious criminal territory. The stage was now set for a confrontation that would not only expose Karen's abuse of power, but also reveal secrets she had kept hidden for years. Karen still believed she was in control. She had no idea that her long history of escaping consequences was about to come to an end, in the most public and humiliating way possible. The initial phase of the hearing unfolded exactly as Karen had predicted in her mind. Judge Judy began by reviewing the basic facts surrounding the flower garden violation, and Karen delivered what she believed was a perfectly structured opening argument about the necessity of preserving community standards and maintaining property values. Her tone carried the rehearsed authority of someone who had delivered similar lectures to intimidated homeowners countless times before. Your Honor, what we're dealing with here is a resident who thinks the rules don't apply to her. Mrs. Rodriguez installed an unauthorized garden that directly violates our landscaping policies. When she was politely informed of this violation, she responded with hostility and refused to comply. Maria's emotional account of the relentless harassment her family had endured seemed to have no effect on Karen whatsoever. As Maria described sleepless nights and her children asking why a mean lady kept sending frightening notices, Karen visibly rolled her eyes, even muttering under her breath about people exaggerating and playing the victim. The audience reacted with audible shock and disapproval, but Karen only grew more convinced of her own righteousness. In her mind, she was surrounded by overly emotional individuals who couldn't appreciate the discipline required to maintain an upscale neighborhood. Judge Judy's early questions were calm, almost casual, so much so that Karen mistook them for ignorance rather than strategy. She asked about Karen's background, her qualifications, and her understanding of property regulations. Karen answered each question with growing confidence, convinced that she was schooling a television personality rather than responding to a seasoned legal professional. Your Honor, I've been the president for 8 years because I'm the only one willing to make the tough decisions. People need structure. They need rules. Without proper enforcement, property values decline and neighborhoods fall apart. The turning point came when Judge Judy shifted the focus toward the fines and legal costs imposed on the Rodriguez family, costs that had nearly destroyed them financially. Karen's response exposed just how little empathy she had for anyone who challenged her authority. Judge, these people knew the rules when they moved in. If they can't afford to maintain their property, maybe they shouldn't live in Willowbrook Estates. Actions have consequences, and some people only learn the hard way. That was the moment Judge Judy asked the question that would ultimately seal Karen's fate. Mrs. Mitchell, During your 8 years as HOA president, how many families have left Willowbrook Estates specifically because of the violations and fines you imposed? Karen answered immediately, without hesitation and without remorse. 17. And honestly, the neighborhood is better because of it. We maintain standards by removing people who can't meet them. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Even Karen seemed to sense that she had revealed something deeply troubling, but her pride refused to let her retreat. That's when Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, the expression on her face instantly recognizable to longtime viewers. It was the look that signaled someone's complete dismantling was about to begin. That's very interesting, Mrs. Mitchell. Before we proceed any further, I think it's important to address certain aspects of your background that may be relevant to your position as HOA president. The change in Karen's expression was immediate and unmistakable. The confidence that had carried her through the entire hearing vanished in an instant as Judge Judy opened a thick file labeled with Karen's full legal identity. Mrs. Karen Elizabeth Mitchell, formerly Karen Elizabeth Thompson, you appear to have a rather extensive criminal history, which I believe is highly relevant to your current role. Karen froze. Her face lost color as Judge Judy continued, her voice calm but cutting with precision. Embezzlement from the Riverside Community Center, where you served as treasurer. $47,000 taken from a children's program fund. Fraud charges connected to a fake charity operation that deceived elderly residents out of their savings. And perhaps most notably, impersonating a licensed real estate agent to collect illegal fees from homebuyers. Gasps filled the courtroom as Karen's carefully constructed image collapsed completely. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. You served 18 months in state prison and were released just 3 years before moving to Willowbrook Estates. Tell me, Mrs. Mitchell, was your HOA board aware that they were electing a convicted felon as their president? Karen attempted to respond, but her voice came out weak and unsteady. That was in the past. I've changed. Judge Judy's reply was immediate and merciless. Have you? Because using your position to extract money from your neighbors through excessive and questionable fines sounds remarkably similar to your previous pattern of behavior. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Karen struggled to remain composed as she rose slightly from her chair, her hands trembling uncontrollably, and her face drained of all confidence. In less than 5 minutes, the woman who had dominated and terrorized an entire neighborhood for years had been reduced to a shaken, exposed version of herself. Judge Judy wasted no time delivering her ruling. Her decision was swift, direct, and devastating. Mrs. Mitchell, you are ordered to pay Maria Rodriguez $15,000 in damages, in addition to all legal fees incurred. The financial judgment alone was enough to destroy Karen, the same woman who had financially ruined so many others. But Judge Judy didn't stop there. You are a predator who abused a position of authority to target innocent families. This court finds your actions to be harassment, abuse of power, and fraudulent conduct. The reaction in the courtroom was immediate. Applause broke out as Maria Rodriguez broke down in tears. Tears of relief after enduring 2 years of relentless intimidation. Within minutes of the episode airing, social media platforms exploded. Clips of Karen calling Judge Judy stupid spread rapidly, going viral across millions of screens. The phrase "Karen's gonna Karen" began trending as viewers shared their own experiences with abusive HOA leaders and celebrated seeing someone like Karen finally face consequences. If you're enjoying watching this, entitled "Karen Finally Faced Justice," make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts. What do you think should happen to HOA leaders who misuse their power? Should individuals with criminal records be allowed to hold positions of authority in community organizations? Back in Willowbrook Estates, the consequences were immediate and severe. Within 48 hours of the episode airing, the HOA board called an emergency meeting and removed Karen from her position. 17 families who had previously been forced out of the neighborhood began preparing a class action lawsuit. Across the country, Property management companies started implementing stricter background checks for HOA leadership roles, many directly citing this case as the reason for change. 6 months after her very public humiliation on national television, Karen Mitchell's entire life had completely fallen apart. What had started as a shocking courtroom revelation quickly turned into a full-scale legal disaster. Once her criminal history was exposed, state prosecutors launched a deeper investigation into her activities, an investigation that uncovered even more evidence of fraud tied to her illegal collection of HOA fines. The consequences were devastating. Her husband, Robert Mitchell, filed for divorce shortly after the episode aired, claiming that he had never been aware of the full extent of her criminal past when they married. The life they had built together began to unravel piece by piece. Their shared assets were frozen by the court, pending restitution payments to the families Karen had financially harmed over the years through her abuse of power. The woman who once controlled an entire neighborhood with fear and authority was now facing the very consequences she had imposed on others for so long. Meanwhile, back in Willowbrook Estates, the transformation was nothing short of remarkable. After Karen's removal, a new HOA board was elected that prioritized transparency, fairness, and reasonable enforcement instead of fear-based control. Policies were rewritten, procedures were clarified, and for the first time in years, residents began to feel a sense of peace within their own community. Ironically, property values didn't decline as Karen had always claimed they would without her strict oversight. Instead, they improved. The neighborhood gained a new reputation, not as a place ruled by fear and excessive fines, but as a welcoming and supportive community. Maria Rodriguez, whose courage had sparked the entire chain of events, was elected to the HOA board. Using her personal experience, she worked to ensure that no other family would ever go through the kind of harassment she had endured. Her story became one of resilience, proof that standing up to injustice, no matter how powerful the oppressor seems, can lead to real change. The case itself quickly became more than just a viral courtroom moment. Legal experts and communication analysts began studying it as a powerful example of investigative justice. Judge Judy's methodical approach, combining instinct, preparation, and precise questioning, demonstrated how truth can be uncovered even when someone has spent years hiding behind authority and appearances. For many viewers, the case served as a reminder that individuals who misuse power often carry deeper secrets, that the loudest voices of authority are sometimes masking the darkest histories. And perhaps most importantly, it reinforced the idea that real justice requires looking beyond surface-level claims and digging deeper into the truth. Karen Mitchell had believed her position made her untouchable. She thought that calling Judge Judy stupid would intimidate or dismiss her authority. Instead, it triggered one of the most thorough background investigations of her life. One that exposed years of deception, manipulation, and criminal behavior that had been hidden beneath a carefully maintained image of suburban respectability. The fallout didn't stop with legal consequences or personal losses. Karen's reputation was permanently destroyed. Her name became synonymous with abuse of power, entitlement, and manipulation across social media. Her story continued to circulate as a cautionary tale, shared by millions as an example of what happens when someone crosses the line between authority and exploitation. In the end, Karen didn't just lose her position, her marriage, or her financial stability. She lost control over the narrative she had spent years carefully crafting. The same system she once used to intimidate others had turned against her, exposing her truth to the entire world. This entire case ultimately became one of the most unforgettable moments in courtroom television history. A powerful reminder of what happens when unchecked authority is finally confronted with real accountability. What started as a simple dispute over a small flower garden turned into a complete exposure of years of manipulation, abuse, and hidden criminal behavior. Judge Judy's handling of the situation demonstrated something far deeper than just legal expertise. It showed the importance of preparation, instinct, and the courage to confront individuals who believe they are above the law. Her calm but calculated approach revealed how easily power can corrupt when it is placed in the wrong hands, and how devastating the consequences can be when that power is abused. Karen Mitchell had spent years building an image of control, discipline, and authority. To her neighbors, she presented herself as the protector of standards and values. But beneath that carefully crafted exterior was a pattern of behavior that had followed her for years, that involved manipulation, exploitation, and a complete disregard for others. What made her downfall so impactful was not just the exposure of her past crimes, but the way those same patterns had continued into her role as HOA president. The excessive fines, the targeted harassment, the calculated pressure on vulnerable families. None of it was accidental. It was a continuation of the same behavior that had once landed her in prison, and in the end, it was her own arrogance that led to her complete destruction. Had she shown even a small amount of humility, had she approached the case with respect instead of contempt, things might have unfolded differently. But by openly insulting Judge Judy and underestimating her experience, Karen triggered the very investigation that exposed everything she had tried to hide. For viewers, the case served as a powerful lesson. Authority does not equal righteousness. Rules do not justify cruelty, and no matter how long someone avoids consequences, the truth has a way of surfacing when least expected. The ripple effects of this case continued far beyond the courtroom. Across communities, HOA boards began reevaluating their policies and leadership structures. Conversations started about accountability, transparency, and the importance of preventing abuse of power at even the smallest levels of authority. For many, Karen Mitchell's story became more than just entertainment. It became a warning, a reminder that positions of power should never be taken lightly, and that those who misuse them will eventually be held responsible. As for Judge Judy, this case reinforced why she remains one of the most respected figures in courtroom television. Her ability to cut through deception and reveal the truth continues to resonate with millions of viewers around the world. And for Maria Rodriguez, this was not just a legal victory, it was a personal one. She proved that standing up to injustice, even when the odds seem overwhelming, can lead to real change. Her courage not only saved her own family, but also helped transform an entire community. In the end, what happened in that courtroom was more than just a case. It was justice in its purest form. A moment where truth prevailed, power was challenged, and accountability was finally enforced. And perhaps the most important takeaway of all, no matter how powerful someone believes they are, no matter how long they have gone unchecked, justice has a way of catching up.